Okay, in this section, we'll be defining and detailing mindfulness, what it is, what its function is, and beginning with distinguishing mindfulness in the traditional sense of the word from mindfulness and how it's used conventionally. So, the conventional use of the word mindfulness refers to being mindful or sensitive to uh, a given person or circumstance. But mindfulness in the uh, traditional sense and in the language of meditative practice is very specific in that mindfulness has qualities. In, for example, mindfulness based stress reduction, mindfulness is just referring to bare attention on an object, like bare attention of the breathing, or for example, a body scan. You feel the body from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet. This is a basic form of mindfulness practice, but in its general or conventional presentation, it may not capture the entirety of it. So, mindfulness has specific qualities. One is that it's always present moment oriented or present moment focused, also called present moment awareness. So, mindfulness is always directed at what is in the here and now. So, if we're observing or being mindful of sensations on the body, for example, or the respiration, that's not going to be referring to what's outside of the present moment. We're not attempting to be mindful of things that have already happened, which would be appearing in the form of memories. And we're not directing our mindfulness at things to come or things that haven't happened yet. So that's future oriented thinking. It's really here and now, being attentive to that. Mindfulness does have the quality of bare attention. In the suttas, for example, in the mindfulness of breathing discourse, Anapanasati Sutta, and in the um, Four Foundations of Mindfulness discourse as well, when it explains observing the respiration, being mindful of the breathing, it's very clear in that it just says mindfully one breathes in, mindfully one breathes out, knowing that one is breathing in, knowing that one is breathing out. So it's just this bare attention, this bare knowing in the present moment of a given phenomena, of a particular object. Another aspect of mindfulness is that it refers to recollection. It refers to remembering the meditation object. The word sati itself means to recall, or means remembrance. So mindfulness has this quality of remembering the meditation object. You're being aware of the breath, noticing the breath come in or out, or being aware of the radiation of loving kindness, the radiation of goodwill, and the feeling of loving kindness that emerges from that. So there's the capacity or the quality of mindfulness remembering um, the meditation object and remembering what one is doing. So as you're meditating, the mind or your specifically your attention will wander off of the meditation object. You're aware of the breath, you're aware of loving kindness, and then this stream of mental pictures or some kind of phenomena at any of the sense doors arises, and then your attention is diverted to that. So mindfulness is that which recalls. Suddenly, it becomes apparent to you that you're off of the meditation object. Your attention has wandered. It's mindfulness that remembers what one is doing. So since you're meditating on the breath, you're meditating on loving kindness. That's the frame of practice, or that's the mode that you're in. Any deviation from this mode, deviation from the meditation object, eventually it'll become clear that you've wandered. Suddenly you're back with the meditation object. When you start practicing, that period of uh, attentional wandering, often called mind wandering, can last several minutes or a couple minutes. As one matures in their practice, their amounts of time that they spend in distraction off of the meditation object becomes less and less and less. So mindfulness remembers, it's the quality of remembering what one is doing, in this case primarily meditating on a given object. So as a quality of remembering, it is non-forgetfulness. Mindfulness is the opposite of doing things automatically. It's the opposite of doing things heedlessly. It's the opposite of doing things mindlessly. So just the word mindfulness, the fullness, there's a fullness of mind. Another aspect of mindfulness that is often not acknowledged at all in the conventional use of the word, and even in the modern mindfulness movement, for example, is that traditionally mindfulness has the quality of guarding the sense doors. It has the quality of being a doorkeeper for unwholesome states, doorkeeper from unwholesomeness. So you're meditating and you're noticing the breath, and there's uh, thoughts, for example, of sensual desire, or thoughts of ill will, or thoughts of anxiety and restlessness, phenomena pertaining to the five hindrances. Those arise, and it is the power of mindfulness, or the developed mindfulness, which sees that happening, recognizes it very quickly, recognizes it immediately. Instead of, with weak mindfulness, there'll be the tendency to entertain or be caught and distracted by that phenomena. With powerful mindfulness, with strong mindfulness, even if uh, those thoughts or that phenomena is appearing or arising, it doesn't uh, disrupt the mindfulness, or if it does, if it sidetracks it, it only does so very briefly. So mindfulness has this quality of guarding, of protecting. There's a specific term called power mindfulness, which distinguishes from these less refined levels of mindfulness to highly developed levels of mindfulness. So, what's an example of power mindfulness? Power mindfulness is when you're beginning to become immersed in the meditation object. It's when, even if the hindrances or distractions were to arise, they're not able to break uh, or, or or really disrupt one's mindfulness and one's practice. So let's say you're doing a day of meditation. This could happen right off the bat with someone who's done quite a bit of practice, but a day of practice is a good example of how this works. So, in the beginning of the day, you're with the meditation object, loving kindness, breathing, mantra, whatever. The first couple hours of the day, you're just assailed by the five hindrances. You're being rocked by sleepiness. Once you get over the sleepiness, there's restlessness. Once you get over the restlessness, there's doubt. Once you get over the doubt, there's sensual desire. Once you get over the sensual desire, then there's more doubt, on and on. So this means that the hindrances are still so powerful that even though you're attempting to meditate, even though you're attempting to relax and let go, you're only able to experience that letting go and this present moment awareness for like a few seconds at a time because the hindrances keep taking your attention off the meditation object, keep taking you out of the present moment. So over the course of the day, let's say that's your meditation for the first 2 hours. It's just like you're relaxing, you're trying to do the thing, but it's just all over the place. At some point, the mindfulness begins to settle. It begins to develop power. Like if the hindrances were just whipping you around the first 2 hours, now they're whipping you around at about half as much intensity. So then you get past the third hour. Now you're going into the fourth hour of the day. You're right at the point where you're like, "Wow, am I even going to get some solid meditation in today, or is this just going to is the day just going to be this battle with the hindrances all the way through?" But going into the fourth hour, this dynamic starts to flip. For example, it starts to change, and you notice that you're beginning to stay with the meditation object for longer and longer periods of time. And the same hindrances that were affecting you so severely in the beginning of the day are not affecting you as much. So the same thoughts are appearing, the same stuff you were worrying about is appearing again, but now it's not diverting you so much from the meditation object. So what is accounting for that? What's accounting for that is that these little moments of mindfulness that you had uh, earlier in the day, they've now accumulated and they're giving rise to more powerful, more rooted, more grounded, and stable mindfulness. When that mindfulness becomes so stable that even if the hindrances are arising, it's not whipping you around anymore, that's power mindfulness. So power mindfulness is you're able to stay with the meditation object, or you're able to remain aware for longer and longer periods of time without interruption. Mostly though, is that there's an actual steam behind the mindfulness. There's a force behind the mindfulness. It's like you've you've worked at the meditation, and you've returned to the breath, and you've returned to loving kindness again and again, and you've let go and you've let go, and these moments of letting go, these moments of becoming aware have now uh, given rise to this unshakable mindfulness. That's power. That's power mindfulness. Able to remain with the object for um, longer periods of time. What distinguishes this from jhana or from concentration is that in jhana is like a further version of this where the factors of equanimity, bliss, and rapture are more matured. An example of power mindfulness is coming out of meditation and having to do uh, something more active like washing dishes or talking to people or some kind of more complex activity, and still being aware while you're doing it, still being mindful while you're doing it. Now, the approach with mindfulness often and traditionally so uh, does imply effort, or can imply effort. And where we're departing from that is that we we still want to be engaging mindfulness. We still want to be aware of the object, but we want to do so effortlessly. Why? Why is that the case if in so many other meditation systems there's a training in effort and there really is an emphasis on um, trying, really genuinely applying attention with force and having volitional force behind the mindfulness? The reason that there's less of an emphasis in that in this particular course and in this particular approach is because that level of volition and that type of approach where you're really trying, it can reinforce and actually strengthen one's craving. It can anchor oneself more so in the attainment of a given result. And the reason that that's not particularly useful is because if you just let go and you apply attention to the object anyways, but in an effortless approach, you arrive at being aware. So in one mode, there's force behind the awareness. In the other mode, there's the absence of that effort and the absence of that force. Whatever is accumulated, whatever is built up, is subject to coming apart. So whatever is put together through force inevitably is going to come apart once that level of force is not being applied. So to circumvent the problems that can result from this, and there can be many problems that result from using force in meditation. The entire approach that I used in the early years of my practice was all as much volition as possible, as much force as possible, and trying to make the mind this very sharp sword, or make mindfulness this very um, penetrative quality. And the reason that it's tricky and and that there's nuance on this particular subject is that when you're trying that hard, when you're using that much force, it's strengthening the sense of self. It's emboldening the sense of self. If you were, for example, able to make your mindfulness very, very strong through effort, then often what the thought that can arise after the fact is, ah, I finally did it. I was able to make the mind that stable. Some people can do it, but most, if they try, will increase their craving, increase their grasping, and probably develop tension headaches, lose sleep, all kinds of imbalances with the pranas and the winds in the body can result from using that kind of strain and using that kind of effort. And if jhanas are states of letting go, if jhanas are wholesome states of release, they're wholesome states of cessation, then it has to be questioned if tight grasping and force is wholesome at all. Uh, I argue that often it isn't. So because using an effortless approach gets you out of the way, and it opens this non-volitional consciousness, and it allows the meditation to begin happening itself. That's a one, it's an easier approach. Two, it's a more effective approach. Why? Because you are becoming less and less involved in what is happening. You're becoming less and less engaged in terms of control, um, in the meditation object and in experience. The sooner you can arrive at the point that the meditation is doing itself, the better. And if you're using volition behind mindfulness, force behind mindfulness, that is really far off from that point. Using force, you might get lucky and have a quantum leap, boop, leap into the non-volitional, leap into all happening by itself. But um, what tends to occur after the fact is you then get into the game of trying to make that happen again, trying to use force to make that happen again, trying to fabricate and construct experience, control meditation to produce that again, instead of just taking an effortless approach, throwing the anchor over the edge of the boat. Effortlessness, effortlessness, effortlessness. Other quality of mindfulness is it has the quality of non-reactivity. So we're just observing. In the discourses, when it says breathing in, he knows he's breathing in, breathing out, he knows he's breathing out. That's it. Knowing that the breath is long, if the breath is long, knowing if the breath is short, if the breath is short. That's it. It's really that simple. There's an interesting approach to mindfulness of breathing that I learned from a friend and a meditation teacher. To mention it briefly, the instruction was happy breathing in, happy breathing out. That's it. Happy breathing in, happy breathing out. As you notice the breath, you just continue to smile and you don't do anything but that. Mind wanders, come back to happy breathing in, happy breathing out. And the jhana factors then begin to mature and blossom and develop. So with mindfulness, with meditation, you're doing less and less and less. And with the forceful effort-based approaches, you're always doing more and more and more. Always needing to push it further, always needing to try harder. Whereas if you just follow instructions, happy breathing in, happy breathing out, that's more than enough. That's enough to give rise to equanimity. That's enough to give rise to bliss. That's enough to give rise to rapture. That's enough for the grosser machinations of the mind to cease. Happy breathing in, happy breathing out. That's enough. In loving kindness, you're radiating goodwill, radiating loving kindness with the intention, may all beings be happy, for example. May all beings be happy, may all beings be safe. When you're using loving kindness, you're feeling the loving kindness based on the sincerity of that wish. The sincerity of that wish gives rise to that blossoming of loving kindness. And you're just allowing that blossoming to continue, feeling it radiating outward. It's that simple. Uh, it's so simple it seems unreasonable. It's so simple it seems impossible. It just can't possibly be the case that happy breathing in, happy breathing out will lead to nibbana. Oh, it needs to be more complicated than that. No. Why? Because happy breathing in, happy breathing out, feeling the radiation of metta, feeling the radiation of loving kindness is sufficient to stop these machinations of the mind and the uh, consistent assault of the five hindrances. So, present moment awareness has a quality of remembrance, has a quality of guarding the sense doors, and is non reactive in nature. The final quality, and one that's particularly paramount, is that mindfulness is accompanied with a Pali term called Sampajanya, which means clear comprehension. So it means that not only is there bare attention on an object, but there's a clear understanding of that object. So if mindfulness is like the initial contact of attention with an object, clear comprehension or Sampajanya is a clearer and a deeper beholding of that object. So if there's mindfulness of the body, for example, you're aware now of the body. Clear comprehension or Sampajanya would be when that mindfulness then begins to understand the impermanent nature of the body. So mindfulness being the bare attention, but Sampajanya, or this aspect of clear comprehension, being a knowing that emerges from mindfulness with an object. Let's say I'm aware of the breath, aware of the breath as it comes in, aware of the breath as it goes out, or as I mentioned before, happy breathing in, happy breathing out. And at some point, it begins to dawn that the breath is an impermanent phenomena. The breath is something to not hold on to. You begin to notice more about that object. You begin to experience more about that given object of mindfulness. The Sampajanya, the clear comprehension, is the penetration of mindfulness into an object. So initially, mindfulness is on the surface, but then when mindfulness begins to penetrate the depths of an object, clear comprehension, clear understanding begins to arise as to the nature of that object. In conventional mindfulness, or mindfulness as is commonly taught, there's just being aware of the body uh, as it is. The body is taken as an object, as an anchor for relaxation. But if the mindfulness begins to penetrate the nature of that object, begins to penetrate the body, then specific truths about the body become evident. They become clear that, for example, all sensations in the body are impermanent. For example, that the body is liable to great suffering. For example, also that the body is without self. There's no part of this particular body that I could find a self in. So these, of course, are the three characteristics of suffering: impermanence and no self. Clear comprehension is gaining uh, gaining insight or beholding insight with mindfulness. So these are the uh, aspects of mindfulness that really uh, complete it and make it specifically right mindfulness. What's an example of wrong mindfulness? If right mindfulness is mindfulness applied to specific objects which lead to insight, for example, the body, uh, breathing, loving kindness, these are all wholesome objects. What are examples of wrong mindfulness? Wrong mindfulness is when one's attention is directed and ensnared in the five hindrances. So that means if you're attending to an unwholesome, or what's considered an unwholesome object, if there's attending to an unwholesome object, then what will result is an unwholesome state. And we can think of all the examples of what attending to an unwholesome object results in when an unwholesome state then arises. Uh, Examples of wrong mindfulness and uh, wrong concentration, for example, is the type of concentration that would be used to uh, kill an animal or or commit a crime. So so these are example. That's an example of the a wrong focus or a wrong concentration. One, the object is unwholesome, and then two, uh, the actual focusing, because it's directed at something unwholesome, the focus itself is considered unwholesome. The mindfulness itself is considered unwholesome. In the context here of taking the life of a living being, there has to be focus on that object, on taking the life of that being. And how does mindfulness play a role here? It guards, it unwholesomely guards the sense doors, in that it's making sure that focus doesn't go to anything but uh, the taking the life of this animal. So remember, right mindfulness is always at a wholesome object. It's always at an object that leads to an increase in equanimity, an increase in tranquility, an increase in wisdom, an increase in letting go, an increase in understanding. Whereas wrong mindfulness uh, and its objects lead to an increase of the five hindrances, increase in sensual desire or ensnarement in sensual desire, increase in ill will and anger, increase in sloth and torpor or drowsiness, murkiness, lack of clarity of mind, fogginess of mind, leads to an increase in restlessness, worry, anxiety, leads to an increase in doubt. Right mindfulness reverses, cleans up all of that. So that's how we know what the wholesome mindfulness from the unwholesome mindfulness is. So now that examples of how mindfulness is used have been provided, we're going to get into the obstacles of mindfulness, generally referred to as the obstacles of meditation. They're known as the five hindrances. And we've touched on them briefly already up to this point, but we can do a deeper dive on them, and how to overcome them. So the first hindrance is sensual desire. And often when we talk about sensual desire, the first thing that comes to mind is sexual desire, but that isn't entirely what it refers to. It refers to anything that is enticing, pleasing, or captivating to the senses. So it doesn't just have to be of a sexual nature. That is an obstacle in meditation that comes up, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. It means all forms of sensuality. So how does that manifest? Um, Sights that are pleasing, sounds that are pleasing, smells that are pleasing, tastes that are pleasing, and all of those also manifesting in the domain of thought. So memories of those things. An example is also the particular phrase or teaching that one of my teaching monks had shared with me in Thailand. He said, "Everyone is a great meditator until it's lunchtime." So that means everyone's mindfulness is strong when they're on a meditation retreat or when they're in a meditation session, when they're in practice. But as soon as they get in front of something that is actually enticing to the uh, to the senses, bang, the mindfulness is right out the door. Is because the activity is so enticing to the senses, it captures our attention entirely. So anything of the sense domain is able to do this. Um, Food is one thing, sex is another, but it can also can really the same dynamic applies in anything that really captures our attention, and that's often the things that um, we're interested in. So an example of central desire causing difficulties in meditation is when you've set aside time for practice, or let's say you're on a retreat And there's really just an overwhelming amount of um, sexual desire that is arising. So you're attempting to be with the meditation object, but there's this constant stream of images of previous sexual interactions or fantasies of future ones. That's all sensual desire hindrance. So it means that this particular hindrance is interrupting the moment to moment continuity of mindfulness and thereby the development of path factors such as equanimity and tranquility. So, how do you overcome sensual desire? It depends on what type of sensual desire it is specifically. So, if it's uh, sensual desire pertaining to food, then the way that that is approached is by doing particular contemplations where you're considering the nature of the food itself. For example, um, that the food, in truth, really is just for the sustenance of the body. Um, the the vanity that can emerge from body identification and our relationship with food in such that it uh, promotes or props up that uh, that vanity is an example of sensuality pertaining to food being something that can uh, disrupt or inhibit the development of mindfulness and meditation. So how is that dealt with? You see that fundamentally food is just for the continuity of the elements that comprise the physical body. It's called uh, recollecting the loathsomeness nature of food, in that food is impermanent. Food is something that looks very pleasing when it goes into the body, and when it comes out, it doesn't look pleasing at all. So all contact with um, sensual desire as it pertains to disrupting the continuity of mindfulness is an invitation to let go of that particular sensual desire in that particular moment. So you're meditating and you have this craving for food or craving for sex that is coming up. And the usual response, the automatic response, is to actually entertain those fantasies and to entertain those cravings. But if you do that, it disrupts the moment to moment mindfulness that you're developing. It disrupts the meditation process that's unfolding and that's underway in that session. So instead of entertaining the fantasy and permitting yourself to go into it as you usually would in ordinary life, start thinking about how you want to eat and how good it's going to feel and how good it's going to taste, or it, the exact same way uh, it, in regard to sex. Instead of permitting or entertaining those trains of thoughts and those tendencies, you just observe it. You just effortlessly return to the meditation object, and you relax and you notice it from one moment to the next again and again and again. And the more that you return to the meditation object, the weaker this sensual desire hindrance becomes. So initially, the sensual desire, the pull may be very strong, but as you keep coming back to the meditation object, uh, keep establishing yourself in mindful awareness, uh, the power of that hindrance then begins to decrease. So, directing the mind to the meditation object again and again, is called vitaka, or applied attention. So applied attention is the antidote to sensual desire in this particular context. You just keep coming back to the meditation object. Gradually the hindrance dies down. There's also supplementary or other ways to deal with the sensual desire hindrance, and I said again, it depends on the nature of that type of sensual desire. But often it's always the contemplation of one of the three characteristics in that sensual desire that allows the mind to uncouple from the grasping that is keeping it hooked on it. So one of those, for example, is the skeleton contemplation. So by contemplating the impermanent nature of the body, the truth that the body will be reduced to bones at some point, that underneath all this beautiful flesh, there's just the earth element, there's just bones. By contemplating or considering the destiny of the body, there can be this release from the pull of sensual desire. So skeleton contemplation is one example of that, but there's also others. Um, you know, decomposition of a corpse, for example, and the stages of that decomposition are meditation objects themselves. Um, that's outside the scope of what we'll be talking about, but it's an example of how there's more than just one way to approach a given hindrance. If returning to the meditation object and again isn't necessarily working with this particular hindrance, there may need to be uh, extra considerations or uh, further consideration of impermanence of that given central desire to weaken its grip on the mind. But these are all like level 2 and level 3 things that a person would do if those are problems. But more often than not, just effortlessly returning to the meditation object again and again, releasing your tendency to go into those fantasies, actually surrendering that is sufficient, completely sufficient. Do it enough times and it starts to subside. So, second hindrance is ill will, um, often referred to as anger, irritation, or aversion. An example of this coming up in meditation is you're doing the practice and maybe the mind is wandering quite a bit, and then you start getting upset with yourself for that wandering. Oh, I've been practicing meditation for so long, my mind should be able to stay with this object for longer than this. Should. Aversion. Just that's just complete aversion. It doesn't help. It really doesn't. So irritation and anger um, are obstacles in the meditation in that they have this nature of being able to interrupt the moment to moment continuity of mindfulness. Another example of this, let's say you're meditating, but the night before there was some kind of conflict that you had, and that conflict is now replaying in the mind while you're trying to meditate. And what's happening is that you're being drawn into this memory of what had happened the night before, and now the mind is playing out this drama of you saying something different to that person, getting back at that person, expressing your anger at that person. And the whole time that you're doing that, obviously, you're not happy in, happy out. Happiness on the in breath, happiness on the out breath. there's been a diversion or a departure from that because of this little proto reality that has emerged, that is uh, that now has the mind playing out these fantasies where it's expressing its anger. So the way the ill will is overcome, or irritation or aversion, is something called vichara, which means sustained attention. So you have uh, the placing of the attention on the meditation object, and as that placing becomes more stable, as that placing becomes more um, enmeshed with the meditation object, or um, connected with the meditation object, it's that it's that sustained connection that reduces this capacity of the mind to go into its ill will, reactivity, or its aversion. One of the ways um, to work with aversion as well is forgiveness practice, and that's something that we'll explain in a later video. But the ill will, the aversion, the anger, a big part of overcoming that as a hindrance is surrendering reactivity, surrendering the need to rectify something, just letting it go. By sustaining your attention on the meditation object, and by that I mean um, continuing to be mindful, that that tendency to aversion uh, is being overcome. Remaining with the meditation object, that also builds the power of mindfulness, so that if ill will or if aversion were to arise, it doesn't necessarily um, disrupt the meditation process. An example of this is like there's a range of response, or there's a range of aversion. There's subtle irritation to, like, completely being very, very angry. And the more that this vichara is established, the more that this sustained attention is established, the less of that intensity of aversion is there, or is available. The third hindrance is the hindrance of seasoned meditators. This is the hindrance of intermediate and long-term practitioners, also beginners. But you find that as a person matures in their practice, they have less problems with central desire in meditation, less problems with ill will, less problems with anxiety and worry, less problems with doubt, if any. But sleepiness, sleepiness affects even the best meditators. So this hindrance is technically called sloth and torpor, but it refers to sleepiness, drowsiness, fogginess, lack of clarity of mind. What overcomes of rapture, which is called piti? Rapture is also referred to as happiness. It's like a rapturous joy. It's a very high vibrational joy, very energetic, and it can be either physical or more mental, more psychological. But either way, it has this quality of like high vibe. Feels really good. That vividness of the rapture is what counteracts the dampening of the sloth and torpor, the dampening of the drowsiness. So notice how when you're sleepy, you're not really able to ascertain the meditation object. You're not really able to stay with it. It keeps slipping. It just keeps slipping of out of attention. That's the quality of drowsiness. Drowsiness weakens mindfulness. Drowsiness obscures mindfulness. So, how do you deal with it? Um, if you start meditating and let's say you start a consistent practice, start meditating 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, and you start doing this every day. It's normal that the first couple weeks, um, as a form of unwinding stress, your body gets sleepy. And if that's happening, you just need to take rest. Yeah, don't go at this war with sleepiness and try to fight it because it it's a very difficult battle to win. And often you do need some rest. So notice how on meditation retreats, the first 2 days is just head bobbing. It's people head bobbing. Why? Because our ordinary lives are run by caffeine and stress. So when you come to the meditation retreat and now you're settling the body and um, you're just resting with one thing, it's so different from what you're used to, and there's an unwinding uh of stress that's now been initiated and that's now happening. So this drowsiness comes up as a result of that. When you're meditating, you uh start to experience, or the brain starts to produce more alpha and theta waves, and in most circumstances we have more theta waves in sleep, or as we're getting close to sleep. So because the brain recognizes that, it has a sense that when you're meditating, you're actually preparing for sleep. So to overcome the power of sloth and torpor, there needs to be adequate rest and um, the presence of piti, or the presence of this energetic rapture and happiness counteracts that drowsiness. If there's a murkiness, lack of clarity, um, in meditation, it means the sloth and torpor hindrance is present. So, but if you were doing mindfulness, the breathing, happiness in, happiness out, that blossoms and blossoms and suppresses the sloth and torpor. But the main way to work with it is get adequate rest, and in most cases, especially initially, if you're starting a consistent practice, it's the unwinding of stress, and it's the body catching up, expressing that it needs to catch up on sleep and rest. So rest for a bit and then come back to the meditation. It's fine to sleep for 15 minutes or 20 minutes and then wake up and start meditating again. And you'll find that that was a much better use of your time than trying to fight the sloth and torpor for an hour. I spent years fighting sloth and torpor. And now I know that when I do a meditation retreat, I just expect to need more rest the first couple days, and to permit that. And as soon as that passes, third day, boom, the rapture turns on, the drowsiness is dispelled, and it doesn't become it's not a problem for the rest of the retreat. So as you begin to develop your practice, you'll see how to work with the hindrances and how each of the antidotes counteracts or um, suppresses that given hindrance. The final two hindrances are restlessness and remorse and doubt. So restlessness and remorse are the same hindrance. Um, Restlessness and remorse is soothed by sukha, which is commonly translated to bliss. So restlessness is the anxiety that results from the perceived unsatisfactory nature of what is happening. The present moment just isn't good enough. You always feel like you want to do something else, you want to go somewhere else, you want to live somewhere else, you want to be somewhere other than where you are. This restlessness, the mind jumping from one thing to the next always, never really settled in what is happening, never really present for what is happening. It's a it's a kind of anxiousness. You're not really able to just be with something simple like a breath or the feeling of loving kindness. There's a sense that you need something more stimulating, something more complex, something that feeds that subtle craving for more. That's the base of restlessness. If you can surrender that, if you can let go of that, and you can learn to just be, then the bliss of mindfulness, the bliss, really even the bliss of jhana, begins to emerge. It's when you no longer become concerned with objects, that the mind is able to turn uh, internal and experience the bliss of its own nature, the bliss of its own depth. Like in that analogy of the turbulence at the surface of the ocean, and um, the depth of the mind at the bottom of the ocean. These qualities of bliss, and also the quality we just spoke of, rapture, that opens up as the sinking into the depth occurs. Restlessness and the monkey nature of the mind is is counteracted by uh, blissfulness. So if the present moment, or if the meditation object becomes blissful, then finally the mind doesn't need to do anything else. If the meditation feels so settled, feels so good that you don't feel you need to do anything else, then why would you do anything else? It's because there's an unsatisfactory nature with what is, that the mind reaches into what could be, or reaches into what was. But when the sukha element, when this element of bliss, of ease and contentment also, uh, when that blossoms, this restlessness ceases. The final hindrance is the most dangerous of all of them, and that is doubt. Why? Because doubt is the hindrance that will make you stop practicing. Doubt is the hindrance that will cause you to give up on the practice or leave the meditation retreat. Oh, you start getting afraid. Oh, I don't think this is for me. I made a mistake. What is this? All this chanting is really weird. You feel unsettled. That's doubt. Yeah. The teacher, I don't think the teacher knows what he's talking about. I think he or she is having bad thoughts about me. I don't like the way that he looks at me. And then he smiles at you, and then you're like, "Oh, actually maybe he does like me." And this is just this vacillation of mind that is absurd. Doubt is the is is such a culprit, not only in that it can make you stop practicing, but that even at uh, minor levels, it can make you do things, for example, like alternating techniques prematurely, or in ways that are detrimental to your practice. Like you're trying mindfulness of breathing, but then, oh, mindfulness of breathing doesn't work, or quote unquote doesn't work. You think it's not working, so you try another technique. You listen to one teacher, and for a while it's good, and then you go to the next teacher, and then there's something that you don't like about them, and then you go to another teacher, and then you go to another teacher, and at every single point along the way, there's some kind of doubt that steps in about that person or about that teaching, that makes you go to the next one. And then you spend your whole life in dharma like this, cycling through techniques, cycling through teachers. It's a waste of time. So the way that doubt is overcome not in the context just of meditation, but in general. Notice how these hindrances, I'm talking about them in the context of meditation, but they're hindrances in general in life. These are problems. They cause problems. They're considered unwholesome states. The antidote to doubt is called ekagata, which means one pointedness. There's also an addition here, which is equanimity. So doubt is overcome by one pointedness and it's overcome by equanimity. One pointedness means that you're immersed. There's an immersion into the meditation object. And that's stable. When that mindfulness is as stable as a mountain, there's no doubt that can shake it. There's no doubt that can penetrate or disrupt it. But the better and more relatable point here is that of equanimity. Equanimity really is the exact opposite of doubt. Doubt is doubt arises because we're concerned about outcomes. Equanimity arises because we released concern about outcomes. Doubt is always in relation to our capacity to be able to do something, or um, the capacity of another person to be able to do something. We doubt ourselves, and we doubt or we doubt someone else, and that's in relation to some kind of objective or goal that we think is correct or appropriate. In equanimity, whatever happens is fine. Gain and loss, they're viewed equally. So something unfavorable happens, it doesn't shake the mind up. Something extremely favorable happens, and it doesn't shake the mind up. That's equanimity. Equanimity is balance of mind, perfect balance of mind. And the Pali word for that is upekkha. So this concludes our section on the hindrances, and also our section on mindfulness. And in summary, these are really the uh, troublesome characters that you'll encounter in your meditation career, not only at the beginning but all the way through, even at the very far end of the spectrum. You've been doing this for many years. These these friends, these uh, troublesome friends show up and can cause problems. And the antidotes that were listed are the factors which help in either the removal or the cleansing of those problems and of those impurities of mind. So in the next section, we'll dive into the first jhana, how to enter the first jhana through mindfulness of breathing, through loving kindness, through mantra, and what that entry into the wholesome state of concentration is.